Professor Chung-Min, we understand there are some new information suggesting the DPRK is looking at the test of another round of a nuclear test. Is that what you've also been observing?
Well, we don't really know exactly what the DPRK will do. We do know exactly by their actions. In January, they tested the fourth nuclear weapon. They've tested an intermediate range ballistic missile. They're also claiming to have tested submarine-launched ballistic missiles. So I think it's very important for our Chinese and Russian friends to understand. South Korea's decision to deploy the THAAD with the U.S. was a purely defensive decision. And this is against a growing North Korean nuclear threat, which is not abating. So this is one of the most critical issues, not only in Korea, but in Northeast Asia.
Do the Chinese friend understand, Professor Zhu?
Partly I agree, but partly I disagree, because I see the decision was a consequence of a change the ground strategy of the South Korean, because we know such a THAAD, centered some sort of a dispute between two sides could be tracing back to in 1999. Then after Kim Dae-jung, Lu Mu-hin, and the Lee Min-ba government, then we say the Park Geun-hye government made the decision at the end. But what kind of the difference just existing? Why the previous governments, after the three sequential ones, they reject, but this government come down to the decision. So I think I see a big change is not how we say booming, how looming the North Korea's threat will be. Then actually it's some sort of a very remarkable shift of the ground security strategic thinking.
There has also been a strategic thinking shift in Washington. Professor Mansourov, of course, there were earlier the six-party talks and then became the so-called strategic patience coming from the Obama administration. After a few years, it seems that it hadn't worked, only making things going to the other side. So what do you make of what Professor Zhu just mentioned? Has the actions shifted?
I agree.
Have the actions shifted, or actually have the strategies and strategic thinkings shifted to begin with?
I don't think that strategic thinking shifted, but I agree with you that the current administration is becoming much more assertive in defending its interests on the Korean Peninsula following the fourth North Korean nuclear test and subsequent missile tests. And THAAD decision is basically it's a legitimate decision aimed at upgrading the U.S. ROC defense against the growing North Korean missile and nuclear threat. Let me say that I think both short-term and kind of longer-term factors at work here. On the tactical side, we obviously were surprised by the successful Musudan test conducted on June 22nd. Musudan is a road mobile intermediate range ballistic missile. So everybody was caught by surprise because it clearly is a demonstration of augmented capabilities. Also, the North Koreans conducted, the very successful party congress, then the SPA session, put in place a new governance system, if you wish. And so the impression was, the point is Kim Jong-un was on a roll, and that must have been stopped. And as a result, the United States made a very difficult decision to designate Kim Jong-un as a target for the sanctions of the U.S. Treasury, which in the North Korean parlance crossed the North Korean red line. The South Koreans basically decided to do the same thing and accepted the THAAD and agreed to the THAAD deployment. I see these two decisions as going together. It's Milan's decision.
All right. I would prefer everybody have a fair share of time when you answer the question so that everybody could have the fair share of say in the discussion. So let me come back to you, Professor Lee from South Korea. The question is not necessarily that the six parties have any issue with one another about the end goal, which is to make sure of the peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, but rather the way to do it. And the thing is, when South Korea and the U.S. thinking about the THAAD missile system, the other parties of the six-party talks are not necessarily feeling safe. Will that help with all parties' unity to try to solve the problem, or will that in a way, bring a collapse of the collaboration, which should be crucial in changing or maintaining the peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula? Professor Lee, I think that is a very eligible question to you.
Yes, it's a very fair question. I agree that this is a very sensitive issue to all the parties concerned, including our American and Japanese friends, and of course China and Russia, the other members of the six-party talks. But we have to remember 3 critical points. Number 1, the six-party talks or all other peaceful efforts will continue if the atmosphere is right, but North Korea keeps on provoking South Korea's defenses for the last several years. Number 2, the critical issue here is we have to understand that this threat is growing. It is not stopping as we speak. And the North Koreans not only have chemical biological weapons, they have other whole list of WMD. And this is only a purely defensive measure, as I've said. And number 3, we have to make sure that over the longer term, all of the other parties must agree there must be security and stability. But the key issue is this: as a sovereign state, South Korea has the right to take appropriate defensive actions, just like China does or Russia does.
Okay.
So sovereignty and security must go hand in hand.
All right. Those points are being made. We are also being hearing from various sides the reactions, including from the media. There are certain medias coming from China, Global Times, which is quite known for its very hard opinions coming from some parts of the Chinese society, published an article recently suggesting the THAAD deployment may haunt not only DPRK but also a wider region in Northeast Asia in the long term. The China Daily, meanwhile, newspaper said that this move will break the strategic balance and escalate the trust deficit among powers. In addition, Asian News Network went further to say that the deployment has the potential to spark fear of a new Cold War. Of course, media could have their own perspective. The question is, Professor Zhu, let me come back to you. Will a THAAD system solve the problem? And why China? Well, the South Korean professor said it very clearly. It's going to protect us. Why is China feeling threatened when their South Korean counterpart is being protected?
Yes, I assume I think my friend Chung-Min Lee made a great point. So sovereignty and security should go hand in hand. But the problem is we're our neighbor. So while you just going on with U.S. security endorsement, then it also will be affect the Chinese thinking and the Chinese some sort of overreacting. So then I see the THAAD deployment decision truly complicated regional, we say, geopolitical landscape. But the problem is Chinese newspaper also exaggerate some sort of that kind of a very grim, the prospect. I don't think the THAAD decision also will trigger some sort of any kinds of the prospect of the new Cold War. That's too much.
All right. There are 2 questions I really want to ask you. It's very important how the Chinese are thinking in this process, because I think South Koreans or the Chinese are the direct parties that are likely to be impacted in the region. So let me ask you first question. That is, why would the Chinese still be concerned? Because the South Koreans have already assured China to a certain extent that the anti-missile system is going to have a range 500, but not further than that. If it changes, China will notice it. So why China is still concerned?
Of course, I think China's concern is very multiple. First of all, in the technical terms, so how the THAAD system also will be neutralizing the Chinese nuclear stability or nuclear deterrence. The second is, of course, the THAAD decision also will signaling some sort of closer arms-based coordination between U.S. and the South Korea. Of course, where we see that kind of things is undermining the China-U.S. Koreans coordination vis-a-vis denuclearization in North Korea. So all we can just speaking very, very simply, we see such a real consequences is really complicating some sort of, we say, contending security calculus.
Professor Lee, have to come back to you. Will that, in a way, concerns from the Chinese side or Russian side or others, destroy or hurt the trust that is crucially needed, first of all? And secondly, why? And would that really help a THAAD anti-missile system overall to prevent the North of going further? or it is only going to be a reaction that the South Koreans could have toward the North? Professor Lee.
You know, defense and offense oftentimes depends on the eye of the beholder.
Right, that's right.
And I agree with my good friend Feng and, of course, Alex in Washington, that the operative word here is to maintain stability on the Korean Peninsula. And we are agreed on that particular point. But the Korean-Chinese relationship is much deeper and much more important than this particular issue. And so as important as the DPRK threat is, as important as having our own defenses with the THAAD system, for example, I believe this is not going to dominate overall Chinese-South Korean relations. As you know, every single year we trade over $350 billion. Right. China is our biggest trade partner and a very important political partner. So on this particular note, I believe that President Park Geun-hye and President Xi Jinping, once they meet at the G20 summit in Shanghai very soon, they will be able to discuss a range of issues that will move this relationship forward.
Mr. Mansourov, we also want you to come in here for your share of the say. Of course, there has been shifts of strategies and actions coming from U.S. side. But of course, you are also having a political season. Nobody knows what's going to be the future strategy coming from the U.S. toward the Korean Peninsula issue. That's one of the biggest uncertainties we're facing now among the 6 parties. So what do you make of that potential? What is likely to be the rhetorics, you think, in the near future coming from Washington? What would that mean, whether for THAAD or many other things concerning peace and stability of the Korean Peninsula? Professor Mansourov.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Again, I don't have a crystal ball. I can say that probably if Hillary Clinton is elected, then we'll see the continuation of the current policy, maybe a little bit more on the hardline side than today. If Donald Trump is elected, then it will be a different world. Everybody will be affected, including the Korean Peninsula, China, Japan, our alliances. So it will be a very different policy.
All right, thank you. Well, we have to let you respond to that, Professor Zhu, what both Professor Lee and Professor Mansourov just said. So many uncertainties. And we also have uncertainties here in China because there are debates going on in this country. And there are suggestions coming from the hawks that we should have sanctions even against South Korea because of the deployment of the THAAD system or the potential of it. So what do you make of all of these uncertainties, particularly here in China?
Okay, so first of all, I'm strongly opposed to any sanction initiative vis-a-vis South Korea because I consider such any retaliation just based on the THAAD decision, getting things worse. On the other hand, we should also just have exploiting some sort of diplomatic space, as Professor Lee just mentioned. So we will have just a summit meeting soon. We can just very honestly and very realistically exchange the views at the summit level. On the other hand, we will see China and South Korean relations, of course, is a very comprehensive one. It's not just the THAAD issues only. So we have a lot of mutually benefiting relationships. So then, for the moment, yes, Chinese could speak on a very dire terms against the South Koreans such a decision. But on the other hand, we should still calm down.
Very important. Before we go, we only have 30 seconds left, and therefore each of you maybe have a fair share. What's next? What's going to be the problem solver? Even though we don't know, but we still need to think about this. It's very important to think about this and discuss this. Professor Lee.
Yes, we have one very, very important issue here, and that is every source of this threat is Kim Jong-un and North Korea. We have very responsible leaders in China, in South Korea, and in the U.S. And it's my sincere hope that the 3 countries, in particular China, the U.S., and South Korea, can cooperate to overcome this very difficult issue.
All right, Professor Mansourov.
Of course, we will expect more missile tests, possibly another nuclear test from North Korea, more belligerent rhetoric from the DPRK, and it's very important that everybody, the Republic of Korea, United States, and China work together to deal with this crisis situation.
Final words from you.
Yeah, I agree. I think the North Korea issue now is a very bigger one. So then all parties, including Russia, China, U.S., and the Korean should just lining up against any new intimidating moves probably adopted by DPRK.